afternoon, guys. Thank you for joining the first ever episode of Britt's Fantasy Blitz. As you might have guessed from the title, I'm your host, Britt Flinn, and we have a ton of exciting things to talk about. I'm not going to spoil them though, because it is Christmas in July, and you're just going to have to wait to open your presents. But if you tune in, I promise there's going to be a ton of fun stuff coming up. While this is going to be a fantasy football show, we are going to focus on news around the league, other aspects of fantasy football, but I wanted to make it a little different than your typical fantasy football show. Football is a huge part of my personality, and depending on who you ask, it might be my entire personality. But I wanted to incorporate other aspects of life that I enjoy, like music, hiking, and of course, dogs. Depending on if the sirens go off, they might even provide some backing vocals to today's show. So I really appreciate everybody joining me and really look forward to your comments and questions in the chat. Um, who do we have in here? So many people. Oh my gosh. We've got Howard Bender. We've got Monday Night Rants, the Fantasy Alarm, Andrew Cooper, who just got done with his own amazing show, Impimba, Herms, Michael Chasco, my darling husband, Sellers, and JV Berry already in the chat. Thank you guys so much for joining us for my very first solo show. So, what's coming up today? We've, of course, got the news, and there's a ton of it coming out at all times. We're covering some of the training camp battles to watch as they fire up around the league. And we are also going to be joined by very special guest, Hutchinson Brown, the young phenom of Football Guys, DLF, and the co host of Hooked on Fantasy. So, can't wait to talk to him in our special segment, Going to the Dogs. But let's get to some top news around the NFL because there's a lot of it to talk about. The Washington Commanders were sold yesterday, but apparently, with the findings that came out, it showed that they withheld approximately $44 million in revenue from the NFL. As punishment for this and other infractions, former Commanders owner Dan Snyder was fined $60 million. For someone who's worth $4.9 billion, it seems like that's almost a slap on the wrist. There's also concerns that the individuals who were harmed by his actions haven't received appropriate compensation, that there's no plan in place to make them whole, and there are no plan or assurances by the NFL or former ownership that the individuals who came forward will not be retaliated against. In my opinion, I think that the NFL has to do better at addressing these issues and stop letting the old boys club run the roost, because let's be honest, if those leaked emails are accurate, there's a lot more of this going across the league that we don't actually know about, but the people in charge do. So that's my soapbox. I'll step off of it and get to some actual NFL news. Saquon Barkley, we've talked about him at length, but today he gave us another hint about his status going into the 2023 season. He removed the Giants organization from all of his social media. We've seen that this is now a trend for players who are unhappy with their status with their teams across pretty much all sports. But for the most part, it seems that these players eventually end up coming to terms with their respective teams and getting a deal done. At this point, though, a long-term deal is completely off the table for Barkley. So he's going to have to make a decision very soon regarding the fate of his 2023 season. I really don't think that there's a good answer here, to be honest. We've talked about how the running backs get the wrong end of the stick, how that they kind of get the shaft. And it's unfair. But at this point, until another CBA comes up in 2030, it's not going to change. So this holdout, it's a little bit of a temper tantrum, and I know that it sucks, but holding out is only going to cause him to lose money. So let's keep an eye on that as this unfolds. Speaking of running backs, another interesting situation that everybody on Twitter is abuzz about, Melvin Gordon, who is still in the league, reached a 1-year, $3.1 million deal with the Baltimore Ravens today. He's another head in the snake of the Ravens backfield. And although he was pretty inefficient last season, I tend to blame that on the Broncos offense itself and not him as a player. If you're worried about J.K. Dobbins, I can tell you that you were never in on Dobbins in the first place. However, I am a little bit worried if you were looking to take Gus Edwards in later rounds because Gordon could cut into his work quite significantly. This is our last running back, almost second to last running back. But after a little midweek scare, Isaiah Pacheco said that he expects to be ready for week one. As we know, he's recovering from surgery on a broken hand and a torn labrum, but he was seen on the field at practice wearing a yellow non contact jersey a few days ago. And now we can safely put all of our shares of Clyde Edwards Hilaire back in the box. We don't have to worry about Clyde Edwards Hilaire ruining our rosters. And the last bit of running back news today, Jets head coach Robert Saleh said that Brees Hall hit 23 miles an hour on the GPS today. While that is impressive, he's still on the pup list, but we shouldn't get too excited because running on a treadmill is entirely different than trying to make cuts, trying to shake defenders, trying to evade tackles. It's definitely encouraging, but let's just keep monitoring this situation before we get too excited about him starting in week one. Now I get to talk about the Cowboys, which, if you don't know and you're new to the show, diehard Cowboys fan, and there will probably always be Cowboys news in the news segment. Brandon Cooks is aiming to get back to his 1,000-yard season after a down year with the Texans in 2022. Cooks is older at almost 30, and with Mike McCarthy calling plays, Dallas may very well become more of a run-heavy offense because McCarthy said that Dallas scored too fast. As a fan, I don't like that. I think you should score as many points as possible, but that's here nor there. Vegas lines currently have Cooks over under set between 725 yards and 775 yards. And I think that that is much more likely to change, or much more likely with an offensive scheme change than that 1,000 yards that he is touting. But, good for him. I love a good bit of confidence. Finally, on FS1 yesterday, James Jones revealed that he had talked to new Ravens offensive coordinator Ted Munkin, who is all the rage, and he said that they were going to go back to the Lamar Action Jackson from Louisville, where they ran a ton of 11 and 10 personnel. So what does that mean for Mark Andrews? Well, Munkin also ran a lot of two tight end sets, and with the depth of the Ravens wide receiver room, it really wouldn't surprise me to see Andrews and even Isaiah Likely out there over some of the other labeled wide receivers. So don't panic, Andrews managers. It's going to be A-okay. I'm going to throw in one last bit of news that is a little bit of gossip. So, Ernie, if you have that popcorn headline uh, graphic, this might fall into that. But Dov Kleinman today reported that Dalvin Cook reportedly offered his ex-girlfriend $1 million to just let the alleged assault go, and that previously the offer was $800,000. The source that Dov Kleinman posted was Bro Bible, and apparently the author of this had already been in court and had been sued for defamation by Dalvin Cook, and Cook won that defamation suit. So for all of you guys out there with Dalvin Cook shares, I would not read too much into this. I think that it is gossip. I think that it is tabloid headline material. Obviously, domestic abuse and assault is not something that we could take lightly, but with all of these just other facts, I think that that's something that we can rely on. Mr. Scamper's 8-minute mark is not shockingly late for a Cowboys mention. I always time my Cowboys takes on time. So guys, please throw your questions and comments in the chat. I would love to see them, love to read them. Howard Bender with the Cowboys and the puke. Um, Andrew Cooper with the sorry, can't turn the hype machine off. What else do we have in here? The Ravens backfield is turning into a hydra with these running backs from Craig Ruth. Love that. Um, Bender with old fart team owners are just the worst. You guys are going off in the chat. I love this. Scampers, I think, has the best, though, with buzzed, blitzed, and fiascoed. So this is wonderful. Again, thank you guys so much for being in the chat. Love it. And also, guys, we've got so much awesome stuff coming up in Fantasy Alarm as a website, but also with the draft guide. We are putting together so much fun stuff with this draft guide. To get it, go to fantasyalarm.com/draft guide. It's $26.99. It's a living draft guide, meaning that we are all chained to our chairs, looking at all the updates, updating every single thing that comes in so that you guys get the most up to date news when your drafts come along in late August, early September. We're not going to give you old news. That's not who we are. But we also have a very exciting other promotion for you guys if you're interested in other sports, and that's our All Pro package. So if you go buy our All Pro package, use promo code Howard, you get 50% off for the first 6 months of your subscription. You get access to everything. You get our playbooks, you get our lineup generator, you get all of our articles. Yes, even including the draft guide. You get access to our Discord, which we have a ton of best balls going on in there right now. You get everything, and it is really the best deal in sports. And you also get a 7-day free trial. So if you don't like it, you can opt out anytime. Um, Craig says that Scampers is always top tier. Sellers, love you. People are reading all these show titles and thinking all of us fans are a bunch of party animals. I love it. Do you guys have any questions for anything going on in the news, in training camp, in football at all before we bring on Hutch? I guess they don't. It looks great. And Scamper says, so long as it's a voluntary chaining. So we're going to take a little quick break right here while we wait on Hutch. And then we'll come back and bring you a very special segment, Going to the Dogs, while we have a word from FFPC.
Breece Hall right now, and I've talked to plenty of high-stakes players, I'm sure you have too, Kev. Had Hall not torn his ACL last year, he might have been the 101 in drafts this year. That's how good he was looking last year, and obviously with the addition of Aaron Rodgers. At the 305, running back 11 behind Derrick Henry and Ramondre Stevenson, right ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs and Najee Harris. Your thoughts on him as a mid-third round pick? How have you been attacking him? Have you been getting him at that spot so far this year?
Yeah, if I start out with two wide receivers, Breece Hall is right at the top of the queue coming into the third. If I knew he'd be healthy for week one, I was still a little.
Well, he'd be going higher than the mid third.
Right. He may go 101 or well, RB1 at least.
Yeah.
But I don't think we know that even if he's healthy in spring and the summer, I still like if I'm running a team, if I'm the coach, I'm bringing him back slow. Like he's on a pitch count. Like I want him for the end of the season because I got Aaron Rodgers for the playoffs, right? Like even if he's fully healthy, I would work him in slow. But that is actually what you want. Like he's still going to get the high value touches. So yeah, if we know he's healthy, he's a first rounder. So like if he's sitting there in the third, especially when I get two wide receivers to start, I'll take Hall all day.
Yeah, it almost makes me think that the uncertainty with Breece Hall has made him unfairly fall too far, right? Like because we're talking about the team here in June. They're still hoping that he's ready for week one. This is not, oh, we'll see what happens. Oh, we're taking it day by day. Oh, we're liking how he's coming along. No, they still think by week one. And the fact that we have that timeline, I think, maybe bumps him up, especially as the drafting season gets deeper and deeper here in July and August. Maybe we start seeing him go up the boards as well.
For me. Can you talk to the ops next for me? 21.
Welcome back, guys. Thank you for that awesome message from the guys at the FFPC. Love the Breece Hall connection because he is all the rage to talk about right now. So I want to bring in Howard Bender's question because we've been talking about this all week on the Alarm Fantasy Football Show, on A Better Morning. Who blinks first, Jacobs or Barkley? I think that it has to be Barkley. Jacobs doesn't have the injury history that Barkley has. I think that he proved himself even, I don't want to say more useful, but more efficient maybe last year with Derek Carr and kind of an inefficient, worse team. So I think that Barkley has to sign that tag if he wants to play elsewhere. But we'll bring in a second opinion because this is my show, but I don't want to be the only one talking here, right? So let's bring in Hutchinson Brown, the young phenom from fantasy or from football guys, from DLF, and from the newly launched co host of Hooked on Fantasy. Hutch, how are you?
I'm doing great, Britt. How are you doing, man?
I'm
Super
Yeah,
excited.
no, I'm
Okay.
man, I'm dude. Like I love it.
Oh man,
Everybody's dude, so it's fine.
everybody's. I call
So
everybody dude or bro. It's how I go.
no, same. It's
Oh man,
actually a bad habit. It's a bad
Boy.
speech habit that
It
I
is.
should have grown
Yes,
out of. But I don't mind being called dude. It makes me feel part of the club. You know what I mean?
amazing. Yeah, I
So
do it all the time. It messes things up sometimes, but yeah, it's a bad habit.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
So who do you think blinks first? Before we get to our segment, Josh Jacobs or Saquon Barkley in their holdout?
Oh man, and by blink you mean like jump out of their holdout and start playing football, correct?
Hmm.
I mean, I think Man, I think when you look at the relationship with Saquon Barkley and the Giants organization and look at Saquon as a human being, I think Saquon would be the first to jump out of the holdout and play for his team. There's a recent interview with him saying that he doesn't want to say F his teammates. He doesn't want to say F his coaches. He doesn't want to do that. There's a recent interview with him saying that he just doesn't want to screw over his team. He really doesn't. I mean, he's considered it, but he really doesn't. Josh Jacobs and that organization is just a disaster right now. I don't think the relationship is there as well. So I think if one of these guys is actually going to hold out, it's going to be Jacobs. And I think Barkley is good. I mean, honestly, when it comes down to it, I expect both to play week 1 on the franchise tag, and I don't think either are going to get the deal they want. But if one were to hold out, it'd be Josh Jacobs. So I'd say Saquon actually blinks first. The
Yep.
relationship there just seems so much better.
Yep, that's exactly what I think as well. Thank you again so much for joining us. I cannot
Of
tell
course.
you how impressed I am with all your content, just how young and knowledgeable you are, and all the hard work that you put into everything. Just an amazing person. Guys, if you don't follow Hutch on Twitter, y'all are missing out. Hutch, what's your uh, Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle, you can follow me there. I'm at HutchinsonB_FF. Sorry, I should have put in my name like you did. But yeah, it's at HutchinsonB_FF. And you can find, like she said earlier in the stream, like I'm with DLF, I'm with Football Guys, Hooked on Fantasy with Luke Sawhook. You can find everything I do from that Twitter bio. So yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the kind words. Thank you. I've been in this series for 2.5 years and just working, man. I love it so much.
And that is so refreshing to see somebody so young
There it
and
is. Thank
so
you.
great. You're just wonderful.
Thank
But
you.
I wondered if you wanted to play a little game. And
Love
as I
games.
said in the intro to the show, I wanted to incorporate things that I like from my life, like hiking, music, and my dogs. And today's segment that came to me was going to the dogs, players that some people may be wary of falling off this season and becoming lone wolves. So if you are down to play going to the dogs, we can get started.
No, I'm not down to play. Skip it.
You're not. We're done.
No, let's go.
Scrap the
Let's do it.
segment.
Yeah,
Scrap
scrap the
it.
whole thing. No, let's go. We got this.
Yeah, and some of these are a little bit crazy because they've been perennially great, but they are in new systems and have new personnel and quarterbacks. And the first one is actually Devonte Adams because, I mean, he's Devonte Adams. He's finished as a top 5 wide receiver forever, right?
Yes.
Last year with Derek Carr, he finished as the wide receiver 3 in PPR. He was first in touchdowns, second in targets, third in yardage, basically every metric that you want out of a wide receiver.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned in the Josh Jacobs question, this year there are some major questions around Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, around the Raiders coaching staff, their front office.
Yeah.
Going at an ADP of wide receiver 8, do you think that Devonte Adams falls off this season, or is he still a member of the dog pack?
When you look at Devonte Adams this year, it's really, really tough because a player like this, you kind of just want to ride the wheels till they fall off. Like, he is a historic, probably a Hall of Fame wide receiver. I mean, one of the best receivers I've ever seen play the game. He's consistently been one of the top, if not the best wide receivers in the NFL. And even with all the craziest last year, you had Derek Carr and his struggles. You had like Josh McDaniels, horrible head coach, and he's still there this year. But even with that, I mean, I feel like people don't really remember this. Devontae Adams led the NFL in target share by over 2%. He had a 32.3% target share in his offense, which is an unreal, that's an unreal statistic for a wide receiver. That's really, really good. And I'm just riding Devontae Adams till the wheels fall off. I'll absolutely take my wide receiver 8. I'm totally fine with that. It's not an overpay. I don't think it's necessarily a huge underpay either, due to the concerns at quarterback that are very valid. But I'm not really concerned about Devontae Adams falling off this year. I think the next 2 years, we're going to be totally cool with Devontae Adams.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this, and I've been kind of vocal about how I don't think that Adams should be going in the first round or
He shouldn't.
even
No.
early second. But at wide receiver 8, that regression is kind of built in. The one thing that I
I mean,
do
wide receiver
worry
8 now is like early second. With how early wide receivers are going, like usually like on underdog right now, it's usually like 7 or 8 wide receivers in the first round. Like Devontae Adams usually ends up being a first or second round pick, which I'd be kind of out on. I agree with you. I'd rather take a stud running back personally. Like, I'm still on the side where I like stud running backs because they give you an advantage of fantasy football if you can find one of those guys. But if Devontae Adams falls to the mid second, I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, mid second is totally fine with me. It's that late first, early second that I have a problem with. And especially if Josh Jacobs holds out, because then they have really nobody and their
Nothing. Yeah.
offense becomes pretty one dimensional. And then you factor in the quarterback situation. So I think I'm with you. I believe in Adam's talent, but the situation, and like we say on here all the time, we don't hate players, we hate ADPs.
Exactly. Exactly.
So this one is specifically geared towards you because I know that you have been a huge proponent of Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Yeah.
So the next one is Tyler Lockett. I want to hear
Lockett.
your
Yeah.
thoughts on him. He's one of the most perennially underrated wide receivers in the league, but last year he again proved his worth. He finished as wide receiver 13 on a team that everyone thought was going to tank. But the addition of Jackson Smith and Jigba has people polarized on where he fits into Seattle's pecking order this season. And JSN has been going ahead of him in several drafts. So do you think Lockett is going to the Dogs, or do you think he's still part of the pack?
Looking at Tyler Lockett this year, it's really, really interesting. I mean, Jack Smith-Njigba, obviously a first-round pick, and this was a guy that put up 1,600 receiving yards in a room with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr. He was a rookie, and Troy Fleming. Like this dude is legit talented, and honestly, like when I look at it, I legit think he could be the #1 receiver by the end of the season over DK Metcalf, over Tyler Lockett. I think he could be leading that team in targets by the end of the season. I would not be shocked in the slightest. And future years, if he's the wide receiver, like I have Jack Smith-Njigba ranked over DK Metcalf and over Tyler Lockett in Dynasty. He's a top 12 wide receiver for me. I'm very, very confident in Smith-Njigba. I'm fine with Lockett as redraft ADP. He's still going in the 6th round, which he is pretty much every single season. That's around his ADP, like the 6th or 7th round. I'm totally cool with it. But if you have Lockett in your team, if Jack Smith-Njigba starts to heat up a little bit, maybe around like week 5, 6, 7, 8, get Lockett off your team. I would try to get him off your team as fast as possible because I feel like if one of DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett is going to lose targets to a Jack Smith-Njigba, it's going to be Tyler Lockett, especially when you look at the contract situation. Metcalf's more locked in for the next few years. Lockett, the Seattle Seahawks, they signed him to a massive contract, but they have a very nice out in 2024. He is a prime cut candidate next year. He's also getting a bit older. So Tyler Lockett, if you are going to draft him, I'm totally fine drafting him. Just be aware that you're going to want to try to trade him away when everyone's thinking, oh, he beat his ADP again in the first 5 weeks. And when he's crushing it, then get him off your team. Sell him for that high point price, and then get Jack Smith-Njigba and watch him dominate the second half.
Well, I know you play a lot of Dynasty,
I
but
do.
so what about in redraft? Do you think that it's going to take Smith and Jigba a little bit of time to acclimate to the system, or do you think he's immediately going to jump in there and have a role?
I mean, I think it might take a bit of time when you have Metcalf and Lockett in front of you. It's really hard to just earn targets immediately. But as I said earlier, by end of season, I think he could be the number one wide receiver for this team. And I think he could be the guy for fantasy that we're looking at as the best receiver on Seattle. And I wouldn't be too shocked by it at all. So I think in redraft, he's a very good pick. I'm looking like when he falls the 7th or 8th round, my hearts turn to eyes. I mean, my eyes turn to hearts. Like it's a smash pick for me. Every time I see him in the 7th or 8th round, it's just so easy for me to make that pick. I mean, even in the 6th, I'm willing to grab him. I just think I'm expecting maybe a slower first half to Lockett and Metcalf, but in the second half of the season, when he gets more acclimated with Geno Smith and this offense, he's going to have a really nice stretch. And I think in his second season, he's going to be drafted as a huge breakout candidate.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think that Lockett's ADP is too good to pass up on, and
It
I
is.
myself am probably a little bit overexposed to Lockett because of that. But like you said, when you're getting him in the 6th through 8th rounds, you're not really losing anything by drafting
No.
him. But there is one guy who's going kind of in that same range that you could be losing some capital on, and that guy is Mike Evans. And I'm
Yeah,
curious
Evans.
to hear your opinion on this because he's never had a season under 1,000 rushing yards, and he's fallen off a cliff in ADP going as wide receiver 33. So there definitely are concerns, and by concerns, that's putting it very mildly at
Yeah.
quarterback with Baker Mayfield and or Kyle Trask. So do you think that this year is the year that Evans goes to the dog pound, or does he still have a few more years left in him?
Mike Evans is a player that I'm actually quite worried about. When I'm like, there's a lot of people that value him and say he's going to hit 1,000 again because he just does it every year. Eventually, he's not going to hit 1,000 yards. Eventually, he's not going to be in the NFL anymore. Eventually, things are going to happen. I think this could be the start of that. Baker Mayfield, like, when you look at Mike Evans' separation numbers over the past couple of seasons, they've consistently declined over the past few seasons. And Baker Mayfield, as a quarterback, when you watch him play, it doesn't matter what jersey number they've got on. If they're open, he's throwing it to them. And Mike Evans just is not a player that gets open anymore. He's a player. That's why he's so successful with Jameis Winston, because Winston was willing to chuck it down the field. Doesn't matter how many people are covering him. It doesn't matter if 5 people are just surrounding him. Jameis Winston's willing to chuck it down the field, give it to him. Tom Brady was willing to chuck it down the field. Bruce Arians in that offense, they were willing to chuck it, take that risk. And Baker Mayfield is just not. He's not going to throw it to that he's not going to throw it to that 50-50 ball guy. He's just not going to. And especially with Kyle Trask waiting, knowing that his job is not 100% guaranteed, he's not going to want to be taking massive risks. He's going to want to throw the open player. So I actually, Godwin is a value. Godwin out of the slot is a player who's going to get open a lot. He's a great route runner. He's someone who's going to be wide open for Mayfield to throw to. Mike Evans is just not that player. His separation has gone way down over the past couple of seasons. I'm out on Evans. Even as cheap ADP, I just don't want him.
Yeah, and you mentioned Godwin. It's so perplexing that Godwin's ADP is so close to Evans because he typically runs out of the slot. And you know that Baker is going to have those short 8-out routes to him
Yeah.
and Rashad White. So it's just really confusing that they are still so close together in ADP when they have completely different skill sets. But I agree with you. I think that this is the year that Mike Evans falls off a cliff. He's also another one of those older wide receivers where they typically reach their apex and then start declining. I think even at wide receiver 33, that is just a little too spicy for me. So I'm glad that we agree there, Hutch.
Mhm.
But speaking of another guy who has kind of started to reach the age apex, and everybody has been talking about his decline for years, but it's never happened. Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry's been a unicorn for basically the entirety of his career. He's the first modern running back to have back-to-back rushing titles since LaDainian Tomlinson in 2006 to 2007. He is almost 30, which is pretty much ancient in running back terms,
Oh,
but he
yeah.
hasn't really shown signs of decline. However, after the addition of DeAndre Hopkins, can we still expect the same fantasy dominance we've seen from him, or do you think that system is going to change?
So there's 2 sides of this coin that you can argue with Derrick Henry. One is that the addition of Hopkins changes everything. The addition of Hopkins, you could argue that it opens the field so much more. When you have Hopkins and a second year breakout with Treylon Burks along with Chigakonko, it opens up this passing game a lot more, which also helps opening up running lanes for Derrick Henry, because the past couple of years for the Titans, it's been a disaster for them with their wide receiver core. They just haven't been able to produce numbers, and as a result, you get a lot of stacked boxes. Derrick Henry's been able to produce anyway. He's been great. But the other side of this argument, especially last year, Derrick Henry had a career high in targets, career high in receptions, career high in receiving yards. Like this, and it was not even close. Like he had a really nice season when it looked at receiving. I believe he had 41 targets, 31 receptions, just under 400 yards, 0 touchdowns, which is a real, like, for him, a significant jump from what he's done. Like usually he's in the teens. Like this guy's not catching passes, but his passing is really there. And now with Hopkins there, who's going to take a massive target share of this offense, I don't think those targets are going to be there anymore. Because last year, Derrick Henry was not a luxury to throw the ball to. He was a necessity. With Treylon Burks being injured a part of the season, with them throwing out Kyle Phillips and Nick Westbrook-Akeen as their starting wide receivers, they really needed all the help they can get, and Derrick Henry was just available there. Now they don't need that help. With Treylon Burks back healthy, DeAndre Hopkins here, Jacob Conco stepping into a second season, they don't need that help. And as a result, I don't think Derrick Henry's going to get that same target share. And then if this team, usually what happens to a team when you add a pro, like an all-pro wide receiver like DeAndre Hopkins, is that you pass more. Look at Justin Jefferson with the Vikings. Ever since they've added Justin Jefferson, their pass attempts have gone up every single season. And Jalen Hurts' first year as the full-time starter, they threw the ball in the first 6 weeks. They chucked the ball, but then they slowed it down, realized what their scheme was, and that's running the football. And Jalen Hurts from week 6 on in his first year starting threw 30 times in a game twice. They did not let him throw the football. And look at the Eagles this past season after they'd added A.J. Brown. The passing game unlocked a little bit. Sure, they were still run first because Jalen Hurts likes to run the football. Miles Sanders was doing really well. But they opened up the passing game significantly more compared to last year. When you add a big-time wide receiver, usually it means that the team wants to pass more. And if you're passing more, that means you're running less. That means less rush attempts for Derrick Henry. So if the volume's going to come away from Derrick Henry, especially at his age, with still a horrific offensive line, I'm a bit worried about Derrick Henry. I think that if he finishes RB 10 to 12 this year, I would not be shocked. And he's being drafted just ahead of that range. So I have not gotten Derrick Henry in like any of my mocks. I just don't like, honestly, like when I see Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs in the clock, I am very, very torn. I'm the guy who's really on Jahmyr Gibbs this year. I have him ranked as a top 10 running back this season. I'm very in on him. That decision actually really haunts me. That's really, really tough for me. But Derrick Henry is somebody that, I mean, obviously he's a unicorn. So you got to give some respect to. I think he's fine as an RB1, but there are plenty of reasons to be worried. So I just haven't been drafting him.
Well, let me ask you this. So the last season that the Titans actually had A.J. Brown on their roster, actually, him and Corey Davis.
Yes.
They both almost had over 1,000 yards, and then Derrick Henry still had 2,000 yards. So do you think even if the pass volume increases, that it changes the way that defenses view that offense, and they change up their scheme and kind of do open up the run game a little more because it's not so one-dimensional?
Yeah, I mean, like I just see, because compared to that year, they were still really low volume pass attempts. They were still like nearly a bottom 5 team pass attempts that year. I just don't see that from this offense this year. When you add that big time wide receiver, I think they just want to pass. I think like I'm expecting a jump to the point where they're an above average team of pass attempts.
Oh.
DeAndre Hopkins with Treylon Burks stepping into a like I'm really high on Treylon Burks personally. Like when coming out of that draft class, I thought, yeah, you have the football there. I thought he was the best receiver in that class coming out. I genuinely believe that he was the best receiver in that class. I just think they're going to be a lot more pass heavy, and Derrick Henry still got plenty of rushing attempts, but I think there just might be a slight downgrade compared to years past. Slight downgrade. So, but yeah, I do see the arguments. That's why I said there's two sides of the coin where you say there could be a lot more efficiency with the run game, and this offense could open up a lot more, and that could help him out a lot, and that can get him more touchdowns. But I'm just concerned about the volume question mark, and that just puts him like not in the top 5 for me, but like more around like the 8 to 10 range.
Yeah, which is totally fine. I think that aggregate ADP, he's being drafted as RB9, so I'm fine taking him there. The funny thing is that people are still downgrading Ryan Tannehill when they are so in on Hopkins and Burks. And we saw last year with Tua and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle that doesn't really work. You can't be out on a quarterback, but be in on the receivers.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But moving on, I want to hit another running back who took a significant hit during the draft, and that's Kenneth Walker. So there's no doubt that Kenneth Walker had a huge rookie season after he took over the role from Rashad Penny, but now he's got red hot competition with Zach Charbonnet. Do you see the Seahawks using a true committee with this backfield, or do you think one of them is going to emerge as a primary back?
So the thing is with Ken Walker, the thing is last year, he did have a great season. Like you can't really argue against that. He did have a really, really solid season. But Ken Walker was so boom bust on his rush attempts. It was ridiculous. I mean, like when you look at the rush attempts when you look at the rush attempts that he had that are 15 plus yards, so those explosive runs, he was averaging over 28 yards a carry. Like he had a lot of explosive runs last year and he crushed it there. But there are but look at all the runs under 15 yards. So like you're like not crazy explosive runs where it isn't a broken play or you didn't break a couple tackles. He's averaging 2.7 yards per carry. And you may say, well, that's like every running back. No, the league average for under 15 yards is just under 3.5. So he's like pretty good below average there in that category. So it was very, very boom bust. I feel like that's why they brought in Charbonnet. Charbonnet is a bigger body back that can consistently get yards and is also a really good pass catching running back. That's the thing with Walker that's really concerned. Obviously in Michigan, we were worried that not seeing Walker catch the ball, maybe it was more of a scheme thing. Maybe it was more of their offense. Maybe Walker has the talent. And he didn't showcase last year. He caught like 27, I believe it was 27 receptions last year. It just really wasn't there for Walker. And they brought in a really good pass catcher in Charbonnet. So at ADP, I'd rather have Zach Charbonnet because when it looks at this backfield, if it is going to be a committee, I want the pass catching running back. I want the guy getting the receptions because in a PPR format or half PPR format, that is everything. It's literally everything. The guy who's getting the pass catching work is going to be more valuable. I'm going to get Zach Charbonnet. I think this is going to be like a 60-40 kind of split where Charbonnet is getting work on a lot of third downs and getting a lot of work on the pass catching game. And that leaves Walker as like a first and second down grinder. And if he's not getting explosive runs all the time, you're going to get really burnt. So I think Walker is going to be somebody that you're depending on explosive runs and touchdowns. And that's just not a player I want to draft at his ADP. He's going around RB 15 to 17, like that kind of range. I'm just out. I just don't want him at his ADP. I'd much rather have Charbonnet, who's going nearly in the double-digit rounds.
I was going to say that ADP gap is significant.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And because Charbonnet was a second-round pick. Like, and people forget, like, Ken Walker wasn't a first-round pick or like a top 10 guy. He was a second-round pick as well. Like, this isn't like, oh, one of them is significantly better than the other when you look at draft capital. Like, these guys were both drafted in the second round of the draft, which is high capital.
Right. And Charbonnet could have gone in the same draft class as Walker. He just didn't and chose to go back to UCLA and actually had a better season when he came back. So he honed his skill set even more. So yeah, I'm with you there, Hutch. We don't hate players. We hate ADPs. Because I love Kenneth Walker, but I don't see him returning value where he's currently being drafted. Let's talk about some tight ends because, that's a really murky position to play in fantasy football. And the first one that I want to talk about is George Kittle. He sneakily crept in as tight end 3 in PPR leagues last year, but he was 3rd on the team in targets overall. And when Christian McCaffrey entered the picture, he fell to 4th. So with everything going on in San Francisco with their quarterback situation and his history of injury, is he in the doghouse for you at his ADP, or are you willing to take him just because the scarcity of the position?
George Kittle is somebody that I'm really, really afraid of taking in drafts. When I see the draft button on him, I'm just like, I don't want to do it. Like when I see, especially with the wide receivers and running backs available, I just don't want to take George Kittle because the volume is just so unbelievably inconsistent. And last year, the only reason he snuck in to the top 10, when you look at his game log in the last 5 games, he finished tight end 15, tight end 1, tight end 3, tight end 12, and tight end 2. A really great stretch with Brock Purdy. But in those last 5 games, he caught a total of 7 touchdowns. And some of them were deep touchdowns too. And Brock Purdy, I don't know how everyone else here feels. I think Brock Purdy is going to be the starter for this team. I don't think it's Trey Lance. I don't think it's Sam Darnold. I think Brock Purdy's healthy. I think he's going to be able to play week 1. And even if he doesn't play week 1, he's the starter for this team. Everything in the San Francisco camp and everything that the owners and the players and the coaches are saying is that this is Brock's job. And that if he's healthy, he's going to be the starter. So I'm going to assume that Brock Purdy starts the majority of the games this year. And it seems like him and George Kittle have a great relationship, a great friendship. So that could help out a little bit. But I feel like George Kittle, with all the other weapons in this offense, George Kittle is going to be a very touchdown dependent, very inconsistent tight end, a very frustrating player to deal with. I don't think he's going to give you the advantage that you might want. I think he's going to be like a low end tight end 1, which is like inconsistent, a little bit touchdown dependent, and just a headache on your fantasy football team. And especially because he's talented enough to the point where he could be the tight end 1. He has that talent. He has the athleticism. He has all the ability in the world to be the tight end 1. but he's just going to be such a headache on your team. So when I see his name, I'm usually looking elsewhere.
Well, and that's
It's
the
not
thing, right? When you have so many weapons on your team, like it's great for real life football, but it is infuriating for fantasy
especially
because
when you
you
look.
just never
Yeah.
know who's going to get the ball.
Oh, yeah, especially on this team too, because the 49ers, Brock Purdy is just not a quarterback that's going to throw 40 pass attempts a game. I would love to say that he's going to break out and have this ridiculous season, but based off what we saw last year, I don't know how high his ceiling is. And when you look at this team, they don't need him to throw 40 pass attempts a game. They have one of the best defenses, if not the best defense in the entire National Football League, as long as they're healthy. And they're going to be winning tons of games. They're going to be ahead. They're going to be running out the football, running out the clock, and they're just not going to need tons of passing volume to win games. So it's just going to be an inconsistent mess when you look at volume, and it's just not going to be something you want to be a part of for the tight end position. The only receiver I really like on this team, because his ADP is the lowest out of the three, is Brandon Ayuk. He finished as the wide receiver 15 last year, and I personally love him as a talent. All the camp reports are saying this dude's taking a massive leap this year, and I think he's going to be the number one receiving option on this team. Like,
Yeah,
based on
I
all the camp reports, based on what he did last year, and based on just watching Brandon Ayuk route running, he's one of the best route runners in the league. He really is. He's just so good. He's going to be the number one receiver on this team.
I completely agree. And then you even have Debo Samuel saying that somebody couldn't even cover him in a phone booth,
Yeah.
which is great to hear from your fellow wide receiver.
Uh-huh.
But I don't want to keep you here too long. Let's just hit on a couple more before we get you out of here. Let's touch on a quarterback. So, Russell Wilson, right? After very
Yeah.
lofty expectations for him last year, Russell Wilson let a ton of fantasy managers down, myself embarrassingly included. Now with Sean
Yeah.
Payton and Joe Lombardi on the team, is he still in the doghouse for you, or do you expect him to be running with the QB1 pack once again?
So yeah, Russell Wilson's somebody that you just have to plant your flag on, and you just have to say, well, this is what I believe. You have to either say, I believe in Sean Payton, I believe in his scheme, I believe in Russell Wilson bounce back, or you just say, I believe that Russell Wilson's not a good quarterback anymore. So the thing is, a lot of people like to say, oh, Russell Wilson was terrible. It was a disaster. But you can also talk about how everything that could have went wrong for him last year on the offensive side of the football. The defense was one of the best in the league. They were shut down. Patrick Surtain and this defense was amazing. But on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy both missed 6+ games. Tim Patrick, ACL tear out for the year. KJ Hamler barely played at all. And Greg Dulcich did miss like the first 6 games of the season, didn't really play, and was not always effective on the field because he's a rookie tight end. That's just how it goes. Devontae Williams, very early ACL, MCL injury, out for the year. The running back room was a mess all season long. The offensive line wasn't great. Russell Wilson was one of the most hit quarterbacks in football. Like, this seriously was a disaster of offense, not just Russell Wilson. So if these guys come back healthy this year, you have Jerry Jeudy stepping into his 4th season, maybe he has a breakout. You still have Cortland Sutton there. You have Tim Patrick coming back, and you have Greg Dulcich stepping into his 2nd season. Javonte Williams, when he's eventually healthy, is going to be back. They have Samaje Perine there now, who's a very effective running back in the limited touches he's gotten in Cincinnati. Overall, this offense looks a lot better. I am still scared to click the draft button on Russell Wilson because watching him play, even when receivers were healthy, even when he had some healthy guys on the field, he just looked so bad. He just didn't look like he was aware on the field. And it seems like the locker room was not really with him. You saw pictures, especially with Melvin Gordon, just staring him down. Like, it doesn't, and he's a goofball in the Subway commercials he did. Just that there's something off here. And I'm hoping that Sean Payton can bring him back. But I am quite nervous. There's really 2 sides of the coin. It's really, really tough. You just have to plant your flag. I have not been drafting much of Russell Wilson. I don't think I'm going to be getting much of him this year. Watching him last year, he just looked like it's kind of over for us. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising. He's about 34 years old. Like, this is a little early, but it's not that surprising to see a quarterback starting to hit a little bit of that age cliff.
Yeah, and the mobility for him was such a big part of his game when
Yeah,
he
no,
was with
not anymore.
Seattle, and now, right.
Mm-mm.
I think I am willing to take a little bit of a chance on him going where he's going is like QB 18,
Yeah,
and
to be
I believe
fair,
in Sean Payton,
to
but
be fair, he finishes the QB 20 in fantasy last year. Even with all how horrible he was, he finished around QB 20. He's going in that range. You're essentially drafting his floor, and you have some upside. But yeah, watching him last year just scarred me. I was like, nah, I just don't think he's good. I don't think
he's
he's gonna be able to
doing
put it together.
He's doing aisle lunges in the doghouse, according
Yes,
to Hutchinson Brown.
definitely.
But
Uh-huh.
thank you so much. We've kept you here for just the time went by too quickly because you were so fun to talk to. You were so knowledgeable. Before you get out of here, please let everyone know where to find you so that you can get your content out there to the masses.
Well, I appreciate you, Britt. Thank you for having me on. You guys can follow me on Twitter. I'm at HutchinsonB_FF. I make content with football guys in their YouTube channel. Going to be appearing on there a lot more. And I write for DLF, otherwise known as Dynasty League Football. And me and Luke Sawhook, if you don't follow him on Twitter, you should follow him. He's at Luke Sawhook. Me and him together do Hooked on Fantasy. We've started that for the last couple weeks. It's pretty much anywhere you get podcasts, and we live stream every Monday nights. It's really, really fun. We've had a couple nice episodes lately, especially our last one with Ray GQ. We talked about the DeAndre Hopkins news. It was a really, really fun episode. And the episode before that, we had Josh Larkey on. And it was really guys and Luke. And I'm very excited for the future of our show. I've got a Patreon. The link is in the bio. It's patreon.com/clutchhutch if you want to check that out. I got a couple of things over there that I'm working on and new projects coming soon. But yeah, that's pretty much all I do. I mean, I do content over the place. I'm just a teenager trying to make his way in the fantasy football space and just really been working over the past 2.5 years and can't wait to keep going.
I think we can remove the trying from that, Hutch. I think that you have already made it. Thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Okay.
Absolutely, Bray. If you want me back on here, just hit me up. I'm absolutely down.
Anytime. Thanks.
Thank you, Britt.
All right, guys, we're going to take another little tiny break presented by the FFPC, and then we're going to jump into some training camp news before we cancel out our inaugural show.
Kendre Miller fan. He's running back 46 in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now at the end of the 11th round. I want you to talk a little bit about him from both standpoints. Number one, from redraft. He's in the backfield, same backfield as Alvin Kamara, who we talked about in the first hour, and then obviously Jamal Williams. But as far as dynasty goes too, what should you be doing now if you're a dunce like me and missed on Miller? What kind of offers should you be making for Kendre Miller in your dynasty leagues right now?
Well, the problem now is the news worked against you, right? In the sense that you know that there's a suspension looming. We don't know what that suspension is. So do you try to go after him prior to the suspension, or do you wait to see how long it is?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the higher the suspension is, the more expensive Kendre is going to be. It gives him an opportunity. We saw Kamara, you don't have to go farther than New Orleans. We saw Kamara take advantage. I remember they brought in Adrian Peterson. They had, what's his name? Mark Ingram.
Yep.
Right? And then they brought in Kamara, and everyone's like, there's no way Kamara's going to be relevant year one. And he smashed because talent comes through. These teams want to win now. They're going to put the best players out there. Kendre Miller comes off of a 1,400-yard season. Like, one thing for me, bulky in fantasy, is if you showed me you did it, I'm going to believe you.
Mm-hmm.
This whole upside thing where you've never done it, I'm over all of that. Like, tight end position I talk about often, that's why I don't invest in rookie tight ends. I'll pay the price for a Kelsey. I'll pay for a Kittle when I know they're going to smash for me, right? Running back, you're looking for talent. You're looking for proven. This guy's proved it. And progression. You look at his career in college, he's progressed every year in the receiving game, in the rushing game. There's something about when you watch him play, and sometimes it's not, I don't have a great stat for you or anything, but there's certain guys when I see him play, something kind of, and he's one of the guys when I started watching his tape and just seeing what he can do. I think he can be an all-around workhorse. He had 224 touches in his last season in college. So, look, we talk about New Orleans. We don't know what this offense is going to look like. They have a new quarterback. They have everything, a whole new situation there. He could come in with Kamara out and just take over that backfield right away.
Hey guys, welcome back to Britt's Fantasy Blitz. And during the show, we had some breaking news that I missed. Cole Beasley has been signed with the Giants. Yes, the slot receiver Cole Beasley, mixing in with a ton of other slot receivers in that Giants wide receiving core that is going to make that training camp battle so much messier. And speaking of training camp battles, they've started this week. So we finally got some insight into what is going on within those teams. So let's talk a little bit about that before we go here. My training camp battle article is available on Fantasy Alarm as part of the draft guide. You can purchase it today by going to fantasyalarm.com/draft guide for $26.99. Or, as I said at the top of the show, you can use promo code Howard for 50% off the first 6 months for our All Pro package, which gets you everything: all sports, all playbooks, all lineup generators, access to our Discord, everything. So get on over there, sign up for access, and we'll have a ton more coming leading up to and throughout the football season. But let's hit some training camp battles really quick before we get out of here. The first one that I want to talk about today is the Cleveland Browns, because they are the first team to have a complete training camp with their rookies and veterans reporting today. But over the next week, we should be able to see a lot of clarity as the pecking order shakes out across depth charts. So as far as the Browns go, we already know that Amari Cooper is the clear wide receiver one on the team. But after that, it gets kind of messy. So they brought in Elijah Moore in a trade from the Jets in the offseason, and he's got all the buzzwords, right? Like he's got the 4.4 speed, the route running, the separation, on and on and on. He checks all the boxes. However, we haven't really seen him live up to his potential on the field, either because of quarterback play, feuds with the coaching staff, or honestly, his inability to grasp the Jets scheme. So it's going to be really interesting to see if he can fit into this offense and build chemistry throughout camp. But I ultimately think he ends up as the wide receiver two, working primarily out of the slot. So Donovan Peoples-Jones is the incoming wide receiver two, and he had a career year last season with just under 100 targets and 839 yards, playing for the majority of the year with Jacoby Brissett. But I think that rookie Cedric Tillman could come in and steal his thunder. Tillman lacks Peoples-Jones' speed by just a little bit, but he's 6'3". He's incredible at creating separation and winning at the catch point. So he's on my watch list at camp, and I don't necessarily know if he loses out to Peoples-Jones. I think he can take over that wide receiver 3 spot. The Kansas City Chiefs all report to camp tomorrow. And of course, as the reigning Super Bowl champions, they are somebody that we're very interested in, especially with the wide receivers. They brought in rookie Rashee Rice, who was reportedly struggling a little bit early on in camp this week. He was having issues with the heat. He was throwing up a little bit on the sideline. But they also have a slew of slot-style guys, say that 3 times fast, who will be trying to find their role in this offense. So Kadarius Toney is the current favorite to be the wide receiver 1, but we haven't seen a full season from him in 2 years. Chiefs general manager Brett Beach seems to think a lot about him, but I mean, obviously you don't trade for a guy if you don't think a lot about him. So that to me doesn't speak a lot of volume. I need to see him on the field. Second-year wide receiver Sky Moore, though, has been impressing out of the slot. And after OTAs, it seems that he has the slot role locked up. He didn't do much in his rookie season, which disappointed a bunch of redraft and dynasty drafters alike. But he did catch a touchdown in the Super Bowl, which is encouraging, because if Mahomes trusts him on that big stage, it really bodes well for their chemistry. There's also Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but honestly, let's be real, he's just a guy. He's never had a target share over 14.1%, and he's really just a depth piece. Honestly, if there was an award for most routes run versus targets, I think he would be in contention to win that award. I think it ultimately ends up being Toney as the wide receiver 1, Valdez-Scantling as the wide receiver 2 just because of experience, and Moore as the slot guy. But don't take your eyes off Rice. Andrew Cooper in his late round wide receiver article touched on Rashee Rice, and I think that he's going to become an integral part of this offense throughout the season. So if you have the bench space, go stash him. The Seattle Seahawks all report to camp on Tuesday, and as we discussed with Hutch, there are a ton of training camp battles going on with that. How is Jackson Smith and Jigba going to fit into this scheme? Are they going to switch from one of the highest rates of 12 personnel to more 11 personnel? Will they keep it conservative and slowly work him in as he learns the scheme? And then there's another battle between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Both of these guys' profile is every down backs, and Pete Carroll has only fueled the speculation while chomping his fruit strike gum earlier this offseason by saying that Charbonnet can do everything. So Seattle threw with the 6th highest rate in the league last season. Do they plan on creating a more balanced rushing attack or throwing? We don't really know. So I cannot wait for training camp to see how this shakes out. If you guys have any more comments, questions, anything in the chat, I really appreciate you guys showing up for the inaugural episode of Britt's Fantasy Blitz. Good morning, Scott Frankel. Shout out Scampers. Shout out Bender. Yes, I also hope that MVS's mom isn't watching. I think I might have to edit that out. Ernie, we're going to call on you to do some edits. And then Cole Beasley, just throwing in a wrench into that entire Giants training camp. But thank you guys again for watching Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I really appreciate having you here. We have a ton of interesting stuff coming up, both on this show, on Fantasy Alarm, everywhere that you can find us. Follow me at Britt_Flinn on Twitter and get blitzed and have a great weekend.